Laughter floated through the warm July night like confetti, the soft thump of bass echoing across the vineyard as the wedding party moved beneath a canopy of string lights. Lanterns swayed in the breeze, casting flickering shadows over the rows of grapevines that bordered the reception. The bride twirled in her white dress, veil tossed aside, her cheeks flushed from champagne and joy. Her husband spun her once, then again, dipping her low as their guests erupted in cheers. It was the final song, the last dance, and no one knew. It would be the last moment they were ever seen. There had been 8 of them, close friends and family, all part of the inner circle. The bride and groom, Elena and Mark, her sister Talia, Mark's best friend Corey, bridesmaids Marissa and Jules, groomsmen Theo and Adam. The rest of the guests had begun to trickle away after midnight, full of cake and goodbyes. But this small group lingered, unwilling to let the night end. Someone opened another bottle of wine. A phone played one more song. Laughter again, loud and carefree, as if the stars themselves were listening. By 12:47 a.m., the DJ had packed up. The last caterer was seen driving off down the dirt road. The parking lot had only a few vehicles left, including the shuttle van meant to take the final guests back to the resort. It remained parked, lights off, keys still dangling from the ignition. The vineyard caretaker, Frank Delaney, swore he saw the wedding party gathering near the vines, glasses in hand, heading toward the overlook. They said they wanted to see the valley lights one last time. That was the last anyone ever heard from them. By morning, the sun rose on half-eaten cake, overturned chairs, and a sound system still faintly humming. Elena's father arrived early to help with cleanup and was met with eerie silence. No one from the wedding party had returned to the resort. The beds were untouched, phones left behind in the bridal suite. Elena's bouquet sat on the bathroom counter, its petals beginning to curl. At first, it seemed like maybe they'd gone out to celebrate more, found a bar, or took a spontaneous trip to the coast. But as hours passed and calls went unanswered, worry thickened into dread. The sheriff was called by noon. A preliminary search of the grounds turned up nothing, no signs of struggle, no blood, no broken glass. Only 8 sets of footprints that wandered into the vines and disappeared. Drones flew over the hillside, dogs were brought in. The vineyards were combed inch by inch, still nothing. It was as if the earth had simply swallowed them. The investigation stretched on for weeks, a massive missing persons case with national coverage. Theories bloomed: abduction, cult involvement, group suicide, even a freak accident involving the nearby cliffs. But no evidence supported any of them. The wedding photos were scoured for clues. Surveillance footage showed the group walking off together, calm, laughing, holding hands. And then, just gone. At the edge of the vines, the footage flickered, scrambled, then resumed. But the frame was empty. Families mourned. The resort eventually closed. The vineyard went up for sale. Over time, the story became folklore, a cautionary tale in a sleepy coastal town. People whispered about the cursed wedding, about the place where laughter died. But the families never stopped hoping. Not until 9 years later, when a construction crew clearing a fire road made a discovery that would unravel everything they thought they knew. A discovery that began with a wedding. Shoe, pristine white satin, untouched by time, sitting alone in the dirt. The morning sun slanted through the reception hall's arched windows, illuminating the empty banquet table where laughter had once echoed. 8 chairs sat abandoned, each bearing a single item. A champagne flute perched on the bride's seat, a boutonniere pinned to a groomsman's chair, a silver hairpin on another. The floral centerpiece drooped, petals curling at the edges, and the familiar scent of roses was faint, overtaken by stale air and dust motes dancing in the light. Detective Mara Whitcomb stepped inside, her boots echoing on the polished floor. She lingered at the threshold, taking in the scene with a practiced eye. It was as if the wedding party had vanished mid-conversation, chairs left in half-turns, glasses half empty. No spilled wine, no overturned plates, no sign of panic, just a void where 8 lives had once converged in celebration. She crouched beside the bride's chair, inspecting the delicate footprints etched into the dusty floor. Slender and small, the prince suggested someone had knelt to retrieve the flute. Someone. Elena, she assumed, but why leave it behind? Mara stood and moved to the next chair, where a solitary boutonniere had wilted against the gleaming wood. The groom's friend, Theo. He must have slipped it off after the last song, intending to tuck it into his pocket. Yet it had fallen here, forgotten. At the far end of the table, Jules's chair bore a pristine white mask, the kind used for masquerade-themed receptions. No smudges, no fingerprints, as if placed there deliberately. Mara's gaze flicked to Marissa's seat, where a torn corner of a wedding program lay. The tear was precise, like someone had used scissors. Then Corey's chair, where a single cufflink balanced on its edge, reflecting the sunlight. And Adam's seat, where an empty wine cork lay, the brand name faintly embossed. Mara walked the perimeter, eyes tracing the shadows cast by the stationary chairs. Outside, the arbor trellis still held strands of ivy and fairy lights, droplets of dew clinging to the leaves. Beyond that, the vineyard rolled toward the horizon, green rows interrupted only by the path leading to the overlook. She imagined the group stepping out here, smiles bright and voices low with anticipation, heading toward the night air. 8 friends stepping into darkness. She reached Talia's chair last. On it was a single white glove, its partner missing. Her chest tightened. That glove would have been part of her sister's ensemble, a deliberate choice, matching the wedding's color palette. But one glove meant she had either been grabbed, dropped it in surprise, or removed it herself. None of it added up. A sudden breeze rustled the window curtains. Papers fluttered from the head table, guest lists, seating charts, vendor invoices, all scattering across the floor like startled birds. Mara bent to collect them, scanning each for clues. Phone numbers, addresses, signatures, nothing unusual, just the names of the 8. Elena, Mark, Talia, Corey, Marissa, Jules, Theo, Adam. 8 names that had disappeared, and 8 chairs that bore mute testimony to their last moments here. Mara stepped back, taking a slow breath. Too neat, too orderly. Someone had arranged these items. Someone with time and intent had come here to stage the emptiness, to send a message. She left the hall and followed footprints in the dust down the back corridor, where a service door led outside. The prince stopped at the door, as if whoever had staged the scene had exited to an alcove she hadn't yet examined. Pulling her. Flashlight. She scanned the shadows until its beam landed on a narrow alcove built into the stone wall. Inside lay a weathered music box, dusted, wound down. It was the same design the couple had chosen for parting favors. Ivory piano keys, painted on metal, a tiny bride and groom etched on the lid. The lid was slightly ajar. Mara knelt and opened it fully. Inside, the mechanism was corroded, but the tiny cylinder still held a single tune. At last. She gently nudged it, and a faint melody creaked to life, warped by time and dust. The sound echoed in the empty hall, a stuttering lullaby for 8 lost souls. Her radio crackled, calling her back to reality. Another lead, another scene. She closed the music box and stood, slipping it into an evidence bag. 8 seats, all empty, each an unanswered question. 8 lost friends. And 9 years later, a detective determined to fill those empty chairs with answers, no matter the cost. The morning after the wedding, the lawn was dotted with shards of confetti, their pastel hues still vibrant against the dew-damp grass. Empty champagne bottles lay half-buried in the decorative ice buckets, labels blurred by condensation and fingerprints. Wedding favors, tiny glass bottles of rose petals tied with ribbon, lined the path toward the reception tent, their ribbons fluttering in the breeze. No one had come to collect them. No one had come at all. Detective Mara Whitcomb knelt beside a crushed paper cone that once held shimmering confetti. She sifted through the fragments, her gloved fingers lifting small squares of silver and pink. Confetti drifted in the air with each breath, catching the light like a constellation of tiny mirrors. She traced the trail toward the tree line, where the grass gave way to the first row of vines. The sound of her footsteps seemed too loud in the sudden hush. Beyond the vines, the overlook perch remained pristine, its wooden railing polished and welcoming. Wine barrels had been arranged as makeshift tables, and on one still sat the remains of an open bottle, its neck stained purple. Someone had been there recently, within days at most. Mara's flashlight illuminated footprints pressed into the soft earth at the precipice, 8 sets of them leading out into the vineyard and then vanishing among the vines. No return path, no indication of direction. Earlier that night, someone had called to say they'd seen lights moving in the fields, flashlights bobbing like fireflies. Volunteers had combed the rows, voices crackling over their radios, only to find empty pockets of earth. Mara wondered whether the vineyard's neat symmetry had been an alibi, masking the chaos of 8 people slipping away, unnoticed. She stood and surveyed the horizon. The valley below was dark, save for pinpricks of distant lamps. The full moon hung low, its silver glow illuminating the rows in stark relief. Under its light, the vineyard looked less like a place of celebration and more like a labyrinth, promising bounty but concealing secrets. 8 friends had wandered here, chasing the promise of a perfect night, and somehow had disappeared into the vines. Mara followed the edge of the vineyard back toward the reception area, where a white canopy swayed overhead. Beneath it, a scattering of overturned chairs surrounded a lone table, its ornate lace cloth stained with spilled red wine. A guest's high heel lay discarded beside the chairs, its pair nowhere in sight. She bagged the shoe, noting its size, a small woman's. The bride's, or one of the bridesmaids, a silent witness to a hurried departure. She paused at the tent's entrance, where a gust of wind sent a paper lantern spiraling down. It bounced once and settled against a table leg. She picked it up, a hand-drawn heart on one side, the names Elena and Mark inside it. Beneath, someone had scrawled, "Forever and always." The message felt like a taunt now. Mara's radio crackled with a voice reporting the discovery of a champagne cork wedged in a grapevine, imprinted with a winery logo. She studied it under her flashlight. The imprint was clear: Stonevale Vineyards, the local label that had catered the wedding. That meant the couple had brought their own bottles, arranged through a private distributor. They had spared no expense. And yet this cork had sat here untouched for 9 years, waiting for someone to find it. Night deepened as she circled back to the tree line. The confetti trail ended at a cluster of ancient oaks, their branches gnarled like arthritic fingers. Beneath them lay a single wedding invitation, edges browned and curled, yet legible enough to read the date, July 14, 2015. Below, stamped in gold foil, the words, "Reception to follow." No address, no direction, no hint of what came after. Mara knelt and touched the paper, half expecting it to vanish at her fingertips. Instead, it felt real and brittle. She rose, slipping the invitation into an evidence folder. Champagne, confetti, and vanishing. Each remnant a fragment of a night that had begun with joy and ended in erasure. 8 people lost, 8 stories waiting to be told, and somewhere in the darkness the answer lay hidden, waiting for the dawn. The security office was cramped, its walls lined with monitors showing split-second snippets of a world that refused to stop moving. Detective Mara Whitcomb stepped inside, greeted by the stale hum of electronics and the scent of stale coffee. The tapes from the night of the wedding rested on a metal shelf, each labeled in fading marker, 07-14-15, 11:45 p.m., 12:45 a.m. She lifted the first tape, its plastic case warm from long storage, and slid it into the VCR. The monitor flickered to life, grainy footage of the reception hall bathed in golden light. Guests mingled beneath chandeliers, waiters passed trays of hors d'oeuvre. Mara fast-forwarded to midnight, when the cameras had captured the last of the caterers leaving. The lens swung toward the dance floor, just as Elena and Mark performed their final waltz. The image shimmered as they spun, then froze for a split second, pixels distorted, colors bleeding, before returning to smooth motion. Mara paused, rewound, and played again. The glitch was sudden and total, lasting exactly 2 seconds, centered on the couple's final dip. When the image cleared, the wedding party still stood there, but their expressions had shifted, eyes hollow, bodies slack. It was subtle, like ripples in a pond, but it was there. She logged the time code, at 0.15, 12:47, 15 a.m. That coincided with Frank Delaney's sighting of the party heading toward the vines. But the glitch had been captured by the ballroom camera. Fixed lens aimed at the dance floor, over 10 feet from the exit door. Whoever, or whatever, had lured them away, had managed to cloak them in those 2 seconds of visual static. Mara swapped tapes for the second reel, dialing quickly to the same timestamp. The outdoor camera by the entrance gate caught the shuttle. Van departing, headlights illuminating the drive. No caterers remained, no photographers, no staff. Then the lens jittered, flickered into white noise, and went dark for just 2 seconds. When the feed resumed, the trees swayed in the breeze as if nothing had happened. But in those 2 dark seconds, the van doors could have opened, and 8 friends could have vanished into thin air. She ejected the tape and loaded a third. This, one from the courtyard camera. The lens covered the path to the overlook perch. The feed showed the wedding party emerging from the tent, laughing and linking arms. The camera panned to follow. They walked out of view behind the rows of vines. And then, at 12:47 to 17 a.m., the screen blinked off for 2 seconds. When it returned, there was no trace of movement, no feet, no shadows, no celebration. Just empty vines, absorbing moonlight. Mara stepped back, took off her gloves, and massaged her temples. 3 cameras, 3 glitches, each exactly 2 seconds long, and all centered on the same moment. The odds of coincidental equipment failure were infinitesimal. Someone had manipulated the tape signals. But why? And who had the technical skill to time it so precisely? Her radio crackled, and she responded absently, still focused on the monitors. The IT tech, Reynolds, waited outside, checking his watch. Finally, Mara called him in. "Reynolds, did you notice anything odd about these tapes?" she asked, jerking her head toward the screens. He frowned. "Yes, the glitches aren't random. The static starts exactly 2 frames before the end of recording for each. Almost like someone inserted a block of code to wipe those frames." Mara's pulse quickened. "You mean someone cut the footage?" "Not cut, they overrode it. A signal injection. It replaces the original frames with noise, completely untraceable if done right." She processed the implication. Whoever had done this had to access the camera feeds in real time, or tamper with the digital storage afterward. This wasn't the work of an amateur. It was planned. "Check the logs," Mara said. "Server access, camera maintenance. I want every IP, every login, every timestamp from the days leading up to the wedding." Reynolds jotted notes. "On it." Mara leaned back, her eyes narrowing on the monitors. 8 lives wiped from the footage in 2-second intervals, the perfect erasure. No wonder the family had received nothing more than silence when they asked for footage. She turned off the VCR, and the screens went blank. The office felt emptier than the reception hall had on that morning so long ago. No skeletons, no bodies, just ghosts in the static. 12 frames of nothing, 2 seconds out of time, where 8 people ceased to exist on tape, unseen and unrecorded. Mara slipped the tapes into evidence bags. She would find the digital fingerprints, trace the tampering, and expose the secret. Held in that 2-second void, 8 friends had vanished, but she would restore their presence, frame by frame, until the truth glowed clear as the wedding lights. The sun had long set by the time James Calder pulled up to the station. His hands trembled on the steering wheel, knuckles white against the leather, and his eyes burned with exhaustion. It had been 9 years since his daughter vanished, but the pain felt as raw as the night Elena and Mark walked off into darkness. Tonight, he carried a plea that refused to be buried by time. Detective Mara Whitcomb looked up from her desk as Calder stepped into the precinct's quiet bullpen. His suit, once crisp and navy, hung loose around him, frayed at the cuffs, stained with what could have been coffee or tears. He approached Mara's desk with careful steps, as though each footfall risked shattering him entirely. "Detective," he said, voice low and hoarse, "I need to tell you something I've never told anyone." Mara gestured to the chair opposite her, stacking case files before she sat. Calder took the seat, but remained standing, eyes flicking to framed photos on the wall, evidence boards pinned with photographs of 8 smiling faces, chairs left empty. He swallowed, gathering courage. "It's about the night they disappeared," he began. "There was something I saw. Something I thought I'd imagined." Mara leaned forward. "Go on." "I spoke to Frank Delaney the morning after. He saw them walking toward the vines, but before that I received a text from Elena's phone, my daughter's phone, at 12:46 a.m. He showed me the log." Mara's pulse quickened. "You have the log?" Calder reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a wrinkled printout. The timestamp glowed in monochrome, June 14, 2015, 004613. Below, a single line of text. "Dad, I love you. Everything's perfect." It was sent from Elena's number to his, seconds before the last dance ended. He had forwarded it to the department back then, but it was dismissed as a prank or glitch. Mara scanned the paper. Why bring this now? Calder's shoulders sagged. "Because I just got a reply from Elena to that same message." He tapped the screen of his phone, and Mara saw the incoming text. "Help me, they're watching." The date read July 23rd, 2024, 9 years, 9 days ago. The department's systems would have archived old logs, but this message had reappeared, out of nowhere. Calder's eyes were rimmed red. "I don't understand it. It came this afternoon like it was sent just now." Mara's mind raced. A message sent 9 years ago, delayed by nearly a decade, or deliberately held and released. Either way, it meant someone still controlled Elena's phone, someone powerful enough to manipulate network servers. "Did you call the number?" Mara asked. Calder shook his head. "I was afraid of what I'd hear." "It could be a trap," Mara said, carefully choosing her words. "But it's a lead, a real lead, after all this time." Calder nodded, tears welling. "I need to help you find her, please." Mara rose and placed a hand on his arm. "We're going to trace this. I'll get it on it immediately, see which cell tower pinged that message. If Elena's phone connected to the network, we can triangulate." He exhaled shakily. "Thank you." Outside, the night wind rattled the precinct windows. Mara watched Calder gather himself before he turned and walked toward the door. She tapped her radio. "Reynolds, I need a priority trace on this number. All records from July 2015 to July 2024. Logins, service events, anything. I want everything." "On it," came the reply. Mara pocketed Calder's printout and settled at her desk. She stared at the message on her phone display in her hand. "Help me. They're watching." Two simple lines that carried more weight than any evidence she'd uncovered so far, a decade-old signal that refused to die. She typed a quick note. Father's plea brings new text from victim after 9 years. Follow up on network trace. Then she exhaled, leaning back. The case had shifted in an instant. A missing wedding party had flickered back to life through a trapped message, buried and unleashed. Now it was their turn to watch, for the watchers who had taken 8 people and hidden them beyond time. And this time, Mara vowed, they would not let them slip away again. The old service gate sat at the edge of the vineyard, its wrought iron bars rusted but sturdy, a silent sentinel over the winding road that led to the overlook. Mara Whitcomb stood before it, flashlight in hand, shining its beam through the bars onto the gravel beyond. The padlock hung heavy on the crossbar, sealed, tamper-evident, its U-shaped shackle unworn. Whoever secured this gate had meant to keep everyone out, or everyone in. 9 years earlier, the caretakers of Stonevale Vineyards had locked the gate at dusk to prevent stragglers from wandering off into the darkness. The policy was strict. No guests beyond the reception area after midnight. The padlock combination was known to only the head caretaker, Frank Delaney, and the vineyard manager, Lucia Cortez. Their statements from 2015 said they'd closed the gate at 11:30 p.m. and left a spare key in the caretaker's hut, expecting to return at dawn. Mara crouched and examined the padlock closely. The stamped numbers on its brass body were sharp, unmanipulated. The spare keyhole in the hut would have granted access, but no one reported using it that night. If the wedding party had departed the vineyard through the gate, they would have needed the key or brute forced the lock, yet there was no sign of forced entry, no pry marks, no tool scratches, no disturbed gravel around the lock. It was as if the gate never existed. She climbed over the low stone wall beside the gate for a closer look at the pathway. Footprints pressed into the compacted gravel led from the reception tent to the gate. 8 sets of them staggered, as though the group had paused to talk, to laugh, before moving on. Then the track stopped abruptly, 20 feet before the gate, in a shallow depression where water had pooled on rainy days. No footprints crossed the damp patch. It was as though someone had floated over it, bypassing the ground entirely. Her radio crackled, and Reynolds announced preliminary cell tower triangulation results. Mara acknowledged, but stayed focused on the gate. She circled it, shining her light on every angle. It was at least 6 feet tall, its spikes curving inward to deter climbing. The vines along the fence had been trimmed neatly, too neatly to give no handholds. Scaling it would have been dangerous for untrained hands in formal attire. Mara backed away and considered the locked gate theory, the idea that the wedding party had been contained within the vineyard by the locked gate, unable to escape to the outside world. If true, their disappearance must have occurred inside the vineyard's perimeter. But where? The vineyard was acres of uniform rows, broken only by the overlook perch and a small creek weaving through the east field. Both were within sight of the reception. No one reported seeing flashlights, voices, screams. She knelt at the depression in the gravel and collected samples of soil and microscopic plant debris. A small piece of grapevine leaf caught in the metal gate where it closed against the post. She bagged it too. If the party had somehow been forced back toward the reception, who had closed the gate behind them? And why leave it locked in the morning, when the cleanup crew had discovered the missing chairs? Mara stood and walked alongside the fence, following the footprints back toward the vines. She paused at a gap between 2 rows, where the earth bore a faint depression of wheel treads, thin, narrow, likely from a handcart wheel. The cart could have carried supplies to the overlook, but there were no records of any equipment being moved that night. No cart was logged on the property inventory. It was as if someone had brought their own, wheeled the party through the vines, then retrieved it without a trace. She traced the wheel marks toward the overlook. They vanished, halfway up the slope, leaving nothing but natural ground. The only explanation was a second gate or hatch hidden beneath the vines, an undocumented service entrance that had escaped notice for decades. If such a passage existed, it could explain how 8 people had bypassed the locked gate without confrontation. It would also explain the absence of footprints across the damp patch. They hadn't walked there. Mara's mind raced. The vineyard's blueprints made no mention of a secret hatch or tunnel, but blueprints were only as honest as their authors. She radioed her team to search the area with ground-penetrating radar for any subterranean structures. If they found a hidden passage, it would rewrite everything they knew about the disappearance. As night deepened, stars arced overhead, indifferent witnesses to the mystery below. The locked gate stood silent and unyielding, its secrets sealed. Inside its iron bars lay the key to 8 missing lives, waiting to be found or to remain forever lost. A crisp white envelope slipped through the cell door slot as Mara Whitcomb stepped off the elevator, settling at her desk. It bore no return address, only a single word scrawled in elegant gold ink: invitation. Inside, the card was folded like a funeral program. When she opened it, the paper crackled with age, yet the printing was fresh. You are cordially invited to attend the final gathering of the wedding party. Below, in smaller type, the date, July 14, 2024. The time, 12:47 a.m. The location, Stonevale Vineyards, entrance gate. An RSVP line was left blank. Mara's heart thumped. 9 years to the day since 8 friends vanished, and now someone, still alive, dared to summon her back to the scene. Or perhaps it wasn't an invitation so much as a summons. Whoever sent it knew exactly which knife to twist. She called Reynolds over. He examined the card under the fluorescence, noting the paper's watermark, a custom bridal stationery suite no longer in production. They must have printed these before the wedding, he muttered. Probably a spare set from the couple's original order. But why mail it now? Mara slid into her chair. And the envelope? He peeled it open. Different. Industrial quality, unbranded. No postal marks. Whoever delivered it had to hand carry. She tapped the card. And the printing. High-resolution laser, Reynolds said. Not in-house quality. Someone with means and intent. Mara's mind raced back to the 8 chairs, each bearing a token. Perhaps this was the 9th, an open seat for her, or a warning. She closed her eyes and pictured the overlook, the locked gate, the padlock that refused to budge. If the invitation was genuine, it meant someone inside the conspiracy still watched them all. She dialed Detective Calder, the desperate father from Chapter 5. His voice cracked when she explained. "Are you coming, Mr. Calder?" she asked. I'll do anything," he whispered. "Good, we leave at midnight." Later, Mara stood before the locked gate, card in hand. The moon was a pale coin overhead. The asphalt crackled under her. Boots. Behind her, Calder and 2 uniformed officers waited in the patrol car, engines idling. She slid the card through the iron bars. A soft click echoed. Mara jumped. The padlock had clicked open on its own. No key, no bolt thrown. It was as though the gate recognized the invitation and surrendered. She set foot onto the gravel. 8. Footprints led away from the gate, fresh impressions outlining a path through the vines. Calder drove his car to the ancillary lanterns and followed on foot, breath puffing in the cold. Mara paused at the fork, where Theo's boutonniere had once wilted. Now the ground was bare, no chairs, no flowers, just 8 footprints stretching toward the overlook. But between the last 2 prints was a 9th, smaller and shallower, a child's shoe print. Her flashlight beam landed on a lone invitation card pinned to the trunk of the oldest vine. The same gold lettering, tacked in place with a bridle pin, a tiny silver heart. She picked it up. On the back, in a spidery hand, a single word was written: "Welcome." Beneath it, another line in the same gold ink: Will you dance with me? As the clock on Calder's dashboard struck 12:47, Mara looked up at the dark horizon. 8 friends had vanished here 9 years ago. Tonight, someone had returned, someone who wanted her to follow, to join the final dance among the vines. And this time, she feared, there would be no music to drown out the shadows. The old sheriff's office smelled of mildew and old paper, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead as Detective Mara Whitcomb stepped inside. The walls were lined with empty hooks where wanted posters once grimaced, and a dusty coffee pot sat untouched on a counter. Though the department still handled active crimes, the file on the Stonevale Vineyard disappearance was tucked away under C for cold cases, gathering dust alongside decades of lost leads. Mara crossed to the cabinet where the folder lay, its edges frayed, its labels yellowed. She opened the file and spread its contents across her desk, handwritten witness statements, grainy surveillance stills, and faded maps of the vineyard. Each page felt heavy with unanswered questions. 8 people vanished without a trace, and 9 years later, the world had moved on. Newspapers carried brief retrospectives on anniversaries, but the public's interest had cooled as quickly as the case. The town's name, once synonymous with terror, had faded into a cautionary footnote among true crime enthusiasts. It had become a cold town, indifferent to the murder of time. Mara traced her finger along a map, marking the overlook, the service gate, the reception tent. She paused at a margin note. Possible underground tunnel? Scrawled beneath the vineyard manager's signature. Lucia Cortez had dismissed the suggestion in 2015, claiming the grounds contained no subterranean passages. But now the notation loomed like a promise. Mara flipped to Cortez's statement, reading where she'd insisted the vineyard was straightforward, no secrets beneath its soil. Yet someone, years earlier, had suspected otherwise. Her phone buzzed. Calder, "I've got something." Mara answered, "What is it?" "Remember the wedding shoe? I found matching shoes along the riverbank, downstream from the creek, that runs behind Stonevale." Mara's heart tightened. "Send me pictures." Images appeared, small white satin shoes, slightly scuffed, arranged in a perfect line across pebbles. One bore an inscription inside the sole. TM, Talia's monogram. Mara grabbed her coat. "Stay there. Don't touch anything else." She strode outside, the night air biting at her cheeks. In the parking lot, the town felt empty, the sidewalks dark. The sheriff's stars glittered in the window above the door. Inside, she loaded images onto her laptop, comparing them to the originals collected from the altar. The stitching matched, the wear patterns identical. Talia's shoes had traveled downriver for years, landing here recently, yet the river's flow should have carried them far beyond the town limits. Mara opened the river's path on a digital map. The creek fed into a maze of waterways that branched and recombined before joining the main river. The only reasonable explanation was someone had moved the shoes. Someone had wanted them found here, in this cold town, to remind everyone that the disappearance had not been forgotten. She tapped her pen on the desk. A cold case required cold strategies, re-interview witnesses, revisit old terrain, unearth overlooked evidence. She opened her notebook to the first page and wrote, "Recontact Frank Delaney, revisit caretakers, Hood subterranean scan, then interview Terra Labs shipping logs." Unusual deliveries around July 2015. The phone rang again. "Reynolds, the GPR team found anomalies under the east field near the creek." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Coordinates?" He recited numbers. She punched them into the map. The red dot blinked in the field between vine rows, mere feet from where the party had last been seen. A hidden chamber. A tunnel? She felt a familiar rush, adrenaline tempered by dread. The town's street clock struck 1 a.m., its chimes carrying through the quiet. Mara gathered the case files, images, and her notes, slipping them into a leather satchel. She paused at the threshold of the cold room, once the wine cellar, now used for evidence storage. Against the back wall stood a solitary box labeled SVV Missing Party. It contained the remaining physical evidence: a tarnished cufflink, a single glove, faded confetti. Soon she would add Talia's shoes. She flicked off the lights. In the dark, the town felt colder still. Outside, the river whispered against its banks, carrying secrets downstream. The lights of Stonevale Vineyard glowed distantly on the hill, a silent beacon marking where 8 had slipped into oblivion. Cold case, cold town, yet Mara refused to let the case freeze forever. She would rekindle its embers, tracing each clue until the vanished returned to memory, and truth warmed the darkness at last. The winding road to Elder's Hill climbed steeply through stands of ancient pines, their needles whispering secrets in the night breeze. Detective Mara Whitcomb navigated her SUV over potholes and gravel, the headlights cutting through darkness until a shuttered cabin emerged at the crest. Its windows were boarded, walls streaked with lichen, and a crooked chimney leaned as if weary from years of neglect. This was the cabin no one remembered, its existence erased by time and the town's collective unease. Mara parked and stepped into the clearing, the scent of damp earth and moss heavy in the air. She consulted her notes. Local legend spoke of a hermit who once lived here, a recluse fascinated by caves and subterranean passages. Rumor held that he constructed hidden rooms beneath the hill, using the natural fissures of the ridge. The cabin had been abandoned after his mysterious death in 1972. No official records existed of inspections or demolition. It simply faded from memory, like a half-remembered dream. She pried a loose board from a window, slid inside, and swept her flashlight across the dusty interior. A rickety table stood against one wall, littered with yellowed papers and a rusted lantern. In a corner, a trapdoor was flush with the floorboards, its outline masked by debris and rotting wood. Mara knelt, cleared away rotten planks, and revealed an iron ring bolted to the hatch. Heart pounding, she pulled it upward. The trapdoor groaned, and a stiff breeze of stale air exhaled from below. Descending the ladder, Mara entered a low-ceilinged chamber carved into bedrock. The walls were rough, but bore signs of deliberate shaping. Tool marks crisscrossing the stone. Faded murals depicted dancing figures entwined with vines, and below them, narrow tunnels vanished into shadow. She swept her light across the floor. Dust lay undisturbed save for a series of footprints, 8 small prints that led to a dead end before circling back. Someone had been here, someone recent. She followed the prints to a rock ledge where a small pile of objects lay: a lace handkerchief, a silver cufflink, and a torn piece of white satin. The handkerchief was monogrammed E.C., Elena Calder. The cufflink matched the ones recovered from Mark's chair. The satin fragment was identical to the bride's veil. Mara's breath caught. These were relics from the vanished wedding party, preserved in this underground sanctum. A soft click echoed behind her. Mara spun as a panel slid open, revealing a hidden alcove illuminated by a single bulb. Inside stood a battered wooden table with a music box atop it, the same design as the one found in the reception hall. The tiny bride and groom etched on its lid were chipped. Beside it lay a stack of invitations, their edges browned, all addressed to 8 names plus 1 blank line. Footsteps approached above. Mara's radio crackled. "Detective, you copy? We've got movement outside." She swallowed. Whoever had sent the 9th invitation had more to reveal, and they were here, within these walls. She opened the music box. The mechanism was wound tight. She hesitated, then released the latch. The tune, at last, played, its melody hollow and warped by confinement. The echoes bounced off the stone walls, mingling with the distant drip of water. Mara's flashlight beam landed on the wall opposite, where fresh scratches formed letters, "Dance with me." The alcove panel slid shut. Silence reclaimed the chamber. Mara's pulse thundered in her ears as she realized the hermit's legend was more than myth. This cabin, this underground maze, had become a stage. 8 friends had been lured here 9 years ago, each souvenir left behind as a calling card. Now the final act was unfolding in the darkness. Above, the boards creaked under weight. Footsteps descended the ladder. Mara steadied herself, reaching slowly for her holster. The detective stepped into the trapdoor light as the figure above took his first cautious step into the crypt below. The long-buried hermit had returned, though he was neither hermit nor ghost, but something more dangerously alive, and the final dance was about to begin. Moonlight silvered the riverbed as Detective Mara Whitcomb crouched beside the shallow current, water whispering over smooth stones. The search team had combed the east bank based on Calder's tip and Reynolds's cell tower data. What they found was a pile of bleached bones, small, delicate, unmistakably human. Mara's flashlight illuminated the fragments, scattering reflections across the wet pebbles. She swallowed, steadying herself against the grief that surged up from the river. Forensics arrived soon after, cordoning off the site and capturing every angle. Mara watched as technicians lifted femurs and tibias, carefully bagging each piece. Nearby, Calder stood with hollow eyes, hand over his mouth to stifle a sob. One of the forensic anthropologists approached Mara, voice low. "Preliminary indicates child remains, likely multiple individuals, age range 4 to 6. Mara's chest tightened. 8 bodies had vanished 9 years ago. Now she held hope that finally some truth would flow downstream. The river's edge was marked by clusters of scattered artifacts, a champagne cork wedged between stones, the pale fragment of a cake topper, a discolored invitation card weighted by a pebble. Each relic had drifted from its original resting place in the vineyard and gathered here like testimony. Mara snapped photos, recording compass bearings and water levels. The current was gentle now, but during spring melt, it swelled fiercely. Whoever placed these remains must have done so recently. No significant erosion marked the stones. She turned upstream, studying the banks. Reed stalks arched over the water, and tangled roots protruded from an undercut embankment. A second cluster of small bones lay half-submerged beneath a root mass. Mara waded in, pulling the fragments free with gloved hands. Among them was a tiny shoe sole, the leather worn but still attached. She recognized the pattern immediately. The floral embossing matched Jules's footwear. Relief and horror mingled in her chest. Her radio crackled. "Detective Whitcomb, you need to get down here." She followed the call downstream, where a deeper pool harbored larger bones, possibly adult. A discarded cufflink shimmered under the water, its engraved initials clearly visible. T.H. Mara extracted it, the cold metal shocking against her skin. A groomsman's keepsake reunited with its owner in death. Forensic divers were summoned to explore the pool's depths, where water shadows hid more secrets. Mara retreated to the bank, wiping moisture from her brow. Dawn was approaching, pale, light leaking over the horizon. The river, once a silent witness, had begun to yield its long-buried stories. 8 people had entered the vineyard and disappeared. Now, 8 sets of remains returned, broken and scattered, carried by currents and time. Calder emerged from the tree line, kneeling beside the remains. He picked up a small bone, turning it gently in his hand as if weighing memories. "Elena," he whispered. Tears tracked rivulets down his cheeks. Mara placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "We'll find the rest," she promised, though she could not yet know how many remained hidden beneath the stones. Investigators mapped the distribution of bones and artifacts, charting a trail both logical and haunting. The remains closest to the overlook gate suggested an initial deposit upstream, then gradual downstream drift. But the clustering near the embankment roots hinted at deliberate placement. This was not a random scattering by water alone. Someone had returned here over years to drop these pieces into the river as if confessing or atoning. Mara followed the mapped points to a fallen, log-bridging two banks. Beneath it lay a rusty metal box, padlocked and coated in silt. She pried it open to reveal 8 small compartments, each containing a personal item, a handwritten photo, a pressed flower, a stub of ribbon, each labeled with a name: Elena, Mark, Talia, Corey, Marissa, Jules, Theo, Adam. The 9th compartment was empty. Her breath caught as she knelt and examined the box's interior. It was a macabre reliquary, preserving fragments of lives that had been erased. Each belonged to the wedding party and proved they had suffered, not vanished, but perished. Here, and the final slot reserved for someone else, loomed like a summons. The box closed with a snap of finality, its contents sealed once more. Above, the sun crested the treetops. The riverbed glowed with newfound clarity, bones and artifacts leaving whispers in the shallow currents. 8 lives flowed here now, returning in death to where they had been lost in life. Mara rose, resolve steadying her limbs. The remains were home at last, but the mystery remained. Who was the 9th, and what awaited in the silence beyond the river's song? The door to Martin Hayes's workshop swung open before Mara could knock. Tools clattered on pegboard walls, metal shavings glinting on the bench below. Martin, lean and prematurely lined, looked up from his lathe, copper curls brushing his collar. He set aside a half-turned wooden goblet and motioned her in, closing the door against the late morning sun. "You're Detective Whitcomb," he said, voice tight. "I've been expecting you." Mara nodded and stepped inside. The air smelled of sawdust and oil. She moved toward a stool beside the workbench. "Thank you for seeing me, Martin." He wiped his hands on a rag, revealing a faded tattoo on his forearm, 8 interlocking rings. "Never thought this day would come, not after all these years." Mara drew her notebook. "I need to understand what happened the night of the wedding from someone who knew Mark best. His brother." Martin's jaw flexed. "Mark was my brother first." He gestured at a photograph pinned above the lathe, 2 boys in matching sport coats grinning at the camera. "That night, I wasn't there. I was in New York at college, but I've lived every day since trying to piece it together." Mara leaned forward. "What did you learn?" He picked up the goblet and turned it in his hands, studying its grain. "I knew Mark had something on his mind that week. He was off, distant. In the days before the wedding, he took late-night calls in the guest house, pacing the floor. He'd laugh sometimes, too loud, and then hang up, face pale. Did he tell you whom he was speaking with?" Martin shook his head. "No names. He said it was work, something important. He wouldn't say more." Mara's pen hovered. Had he ever been secretive before? Never like that. He set the goblet down and rubbed his palms together. "When I heard they'd disappeared, I thought he might have run off, start fresh, but I knew better. And when Mark didn't show at home, I lost it." Mara closed her notebook. "And the family? How did they cope?" Martin's eyes darkened. "They couldn't. My parents. Dad died of a heart attack the next year. Mom moved away, changed her name. For a while, I was all they had." He paused. "I took over the vineyard to keep Mark's memory alive." Mara studied him. "You stayed here, managing Stonevale despite everything?" He exhaled. "This place was Mark's dream. I couldn't let it die with him. But every vine, every barrel reminded me he was gone, all of them gone." She hesitated before pressing on. "Did you ever doubt your brother? Suspect he might have been involved in something?" Dark? Martin's stare hardened. Mark was too good for that. He loved Elena. He'd planned this wedding for months. He wouldn't have lured his friends into danger. Mara nodded slowly. What about Corey? Theo? Anyone in the inner circle who might have had a motive to disappear with them? Martin's shoulders slumped. They were a tight group. They met here for the bachelor's party. No arguments, no fights. One night they drank and laughed. That's all anybody remembers. His gaze flicked to the lathe, then back to Mara. But I did notice something. A week before the wedding, Mark asked me to craft a special case, small, lined with velvet, fitted for something precious. When I asked what it was, he said it was a gift for Elena. Something old, something new. Martin's voice cracked. The case never left the bench. It's still there. He pointed to a wooden box on a high shelf, ornate but unfinished. Mara stood and retrieved the box, brushing dust from its surface. Inside, she found a velvet-lined compartment shaped like a small vial. Its bottom bore a single engraved initial, M.H. "Did he ever show you what was to go inside?" she asked softly. Martin looked away. No, he wouldn't. Said it was a secret between him and Elena. Mara closed the box gently. "Thank you, Martin. You've given me more than most." He nodded, eyes distant. "Find them, detective. Find my brother. Give me answers." Outside, the sun traced patterns through dusty windows. Mara stepped into the workshop's hum, the reliquary box in hand. The case and its missing contents hinted at a secret the wedding party carried with them that night, one that might finally unlock the truth behind their disappearance and the sinister force that claimed 8 lives in the vineyard shadows. The box of wedding photographs arrived at the precinct unceremoniously, packed in a plain cardboard folder stamped "Evidence." Detective Mara Whitcomb spread the glossy prints across her desk, each frame a freeze frame of laughter, champagne, toasts, and the final waltz under golden lights. At first glance, they seemed innocuous, smiles, bright poses poised, but Mara had learned that innocence often masked darker truths. She picked up the first image, the bridal couple at the altar. Behind them, the congregation blurred into soft focus. Yet in the haze, at the far edge of the pews, a figure stood alone, a man in a dark jacket, hand raised as if waving goodbye. He did not match any guest list. She flipped the photo, but the back held no annotation. The figure's face was partially obscured by a decorative column. Its identity remained a question. Moving to the next photo, taken moments later at the reception, Mara noticed something odd in the background. The floral arch framing the dance floor formed a subtle heart shape where strands of ivy overlapped. Within that heart, 2 leaves curled inward in a way that resembled an arrow. She zoomed in on her laptop, tracing the pattern. The arrow pointed toward the far corner of the hall where the exit door stood. A hint or a warning. She laid that photo aside and examined a third print, a candid shot of Theo and Adam, arms slung over each other's shoulders, laughing. On the table behind them lay the music box, closed. But if she looked closely at the mirrored surface of a champagne flute resting nearby, she could see the reflection of the box's lid ajar, a detail invisible from the photographer's angle. Someone had manipulated that moment, ensuring the open lid was captured in reflection only. Her pen hovered. Over the next image, a wide-angle group shot at the overlook. The valley lights glimmered behind them like stars. Elena stood center, holding her bouquet. Talia clasped her sister's arm, but in the dark row of vines behind them, faintly visible, was a 9th figure, a small girl in a pale dress, face turned away. The guest list had no children recorded. Who was she? And why had she appeared only in that one frame? Mara rotated through prints from the photo booth, the backdrop of lush greenery and hanging lanterns. Marissa, Jules, and Corey struck playful poses, passing the mask from Chapter 6 between them. On the strip's margins, someone had drawn tiny symbols: a rose, a key, a vine. Each doodle corresponded to seating tokens found on the empty chairs. The rose for Elena, the key for Theo, the vine for the group's bond. The messages stitched into their likenesses, linking tokens and photos. She picked up a final photo, a Polaroid from the end of the night. It showed the shuttle van's tail lights as it sped away. In the wet pavement's reflection, 8 silhouettes lingered by the gate, hands intertwined in a circle. The photographer hadn't noticed the reflection until hours later, by which time the original had been developed and filed. The image indicated they had formed a ring before vanishing, a pact of unity too solemn to break. Mara sat back, the photographs forming a tapestry of hidden messages. Someone had orchestrated more than a disappearance. They had crafted a visual riddle: hearts, arrows, reflections, ghostly figures, all clues pointing to a deeper design. Each shot was a message meant to be deciphered only by those who knew where to look. She boxed the prints carefully and slipped them into an evidence binder labeled Visual Ciphers. Then she opened her notebook and penciled connections: altar figure, gate exit, ivy arrow, overlook path, music box reflection, underground, chamber, ghost girl, 9th invitation, photo booth symbols, Chapter 6, tokens, van reflection, circle pact. Her radio crackled. Detective, analysts confirmed the figure at the altar matches the hermit's profile from the cabin logs. Mara's eyes narrowed. The cabin and the photographs were linked. The hermit had moved between the hilltop retreat and the vineyard, embedding himself in the wedding's record. He had guided the party, controlled the ceremony, and stitched their fates into film. Mara gathered the binder and stood. The hidden messages were no accident. They were prophecy. The wedding photos had whispered of 8 lost souls, a 9th watcher, and a final dance beneath the earth. Now, armed with the patterns and parallels, she would follow the visual breadcrumbs back to the heart of the vineyard and into the darkness, where the hermit awaited. Her name was Lily Porter, 10 years old at the time of the wedding, and the youngest to bear flowers down the aisle. She sat on a folding chair in the precinct's interview room, legs swinging, clutching a small basket, of faux petals she'd kept as a memento. Detective Mara Whitcomb watched her gently, aware that the child's memory held a piece of the puzzle no one else could recall. Lily's amber curls framed wide eyes that seemed too knowing for her age. "Thank you for seeing me," Mara said, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "You visited the vineyard for a school fundraiser last week. You wanted to help." Lily nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I remember things now." Mara placed the basket on the table. "Tell me what you remember about the night the wedding party vanished." Lily's small hand sifted through the petals. "I was inside the tent eating cake. I heard my name called from outside, my sister's voice. She said, 'Lily, come look.'" She paused, lips pressed tight. "I crept to the flap and peeked. I saw 8 people standing in a circle in the grass under the lights. They tossed petals into the air, giggling." Lily smiled at the memory. "It was pretty." Mara nodded encouragingly. "What happened next?" Lily's brow furrowed. "The petals faded, like someone blew them away. Then I saw someone else. He stood behind the vines. He wore a dark coat and held a lantern. I couldn't see his face." She shivered. He looked at them, and then he let go of the lantern, and it floated upward, lighting the petals. Lily's voice softened. Then all the petals flew toward him, like they were drawn to the light. The people in the circle reached up, but the petals slipped through their fingers. Mara's heart pounded. The flower tokens, the lantern, at Elder's Hill, the ritual that lured them on. "Did you see what happened after that?" she asked. Lily's eyes welled. "I heard music, a soft song like wind chimes. I heard whispers too, but I didn't understand the words. They sounded like promises." She glanced at the basket. When the whispering stopped, the circle was empty. The lantern floated, back down and bumped against a vine. Then it winked out. Silence hung between them. Mara pressed on. "What did you do then?" Lily swallowed. "I ran inside and told my sister, but no one believed me. They said I must have been dreaming." She raised the basket. "I kept the petals because I knew I wasn't dreaming." Mara reached for the basket and lifted a handful of petals. They were brittle but intact, still tinged with pastel pink. Each bore a faint imprint, an intertwined vine pattern matching the photo booth symbols. She placed them in an evidence bag. "You're very brave," she said softly. "You helped us more than you know." Lily touched her arm. "I want them found. I want to tell Elena that I'm sorry I didn't save her." Tears spilled down her cheeks. Mara offered a tissue, and Lily took it. "It's not your fault," Mara whispered. "You've given us new leads." As Lily left with a comforting officer, Mara studied the basket. The petals, flower tokens from Chapter 6, had gathered in the circle as Lily saw. The lantern had pulled them, a beacon for 8 souls. The whispering promises, the wind chime music, this was the hermit's summons, inviting the wedding party into his subterranean lair. Mara walked to her evidence board and pinned the petal sample beside the photo booth symbols and the music. Box reflection. The pieces clicked. The hermit's ritual had drawn them into the earth, under the vines, into his cabin on Elder's Hill. Lily's memory illuminated the last moment before the vanishings, an orchestrated enchantment, not an accident. She exhaled, steeling herself for what came next. 8 petals collected, a lantern guiding, a song of whispers. The hermit had been performing this ritual for decades. Now, with Lily's recollection, Mara knew exactly where to find the final piece of the ritual. The old fountain at the heart of the vineyard, long dry, concealed beneath ivy. If the flower tokens could be reunited there, she might force the ritual to break, release the final bond, and reveal the hidden chamber. Mara tucked the evidence into her bag. A flower girl's memory had lit the path forward, and she would follow it relentlessly, petals and promises, leading the way back to the 8 lost souls. The cellar door swung open on its rusty hinges, releasing a musty scent of barrel-stored wine and damp stone. Detective Mara Whitcomb's flashlight beam carved a narrow path through darkness, illuminating rows of oak barrels stacked 3 high. She paused at the base of the stairs, listening to silence so thick it felt tangible. The wine cellar had been repurposed for evidence storage, but its back wall remained sealed by centuries-old stone. Tonight, she would breach it. Careful not to disturb case files piled near the entrance, Mara edged forward, brushing dust from a low-mounted barrel. Below it, faint scratches marked the worn flagstones, footprints from work boots nearly 9 years old. She knelt and traced. The shallow grooves, confirming the convergence of pathways, cellar door, barrel row 3, drill site. This was where the hermit had tunneled downward, carving a passage to the hidden chamber beneath Elder's Hill. A soft, metallic ring cut through the air. Mara turned, flashlight landing on a wine rack where someone had hung a single white invitation card. Its gold script read simply, "Proceed." She pocketed it and went to work. Pulling a small toolkit from her satchel, she extracted a portable rotary hammer. Reverberations echoed among the barrels as she drilled into the mortar between stones. The dust settled in swirling motes, reflecting the beam like a miniature galaxy. After several minutes, a crack spawned, widening under her persistence until a small section of wall loosened. Mara pried it free, revealing a narrow gap where moonlight filtered through. She squeezed inside, flashlight bobbing against her chest. The chamber beyond was cramped, but confirmed the blueprints. A stone-lined tunnel angled downward at 30 degrees, its floor strewn with gravel and clay. Mara ducked through the opening and stood upright as the passage widened. The tunnel ran, smooth, man-made, expertly shaped. She examined the walls, noting tool impressions identical to those in the hermit's cabin on Elder's Hill. The soil had been carried out in small buckets, evidence of patient, meticulous work. She followed the tunnel's curve, her steps muffled against the earth. Water dripped somewhere ahead, the sound distant and measured. The passage descended for 15 feet before opening into a domed cavern. Stalactites dripped from the ceiling, and lichen glowed faint green under her light. In the center lay a mosaic of broken tiles and wine stain, arranged in a circular pattern. It matched the ceremonial ring observed in the riverbed relics, only larger and intact, a ritual altar. 8 shallow depressions formed a ring around. A central basin, each marked with initials matching the wedding party: EC, MH, TR, CJ, RS, JL, TH, AD. The 9th depression lay empty. Mara crouched, examining the basin. It was carved from a single slab of limestone, its interior worn by years of liquid flow. Tiny residue crystals clung to the grooves, wine, champagne, perhaps something else with ceremonial potency. She scooped a sample into an evidence vial. The ritual basin had once bound the 8 through shared libation. Now it might release them. She traced her beam to a stone archway opposite the entrance, where a wrought iron grate barred further descent. Its bars were engraved with vine motifs, the same as the wedding tokens. The grate bore a padlock identical to the one on the service gate. Someone had brought it here, sealed these spirits within the earth, and left no key behind. Mara knelt before the grate. Above it, carved into the rock, were etched words in an elegant script. "Only when the circle is whole shall the path be free." She pressed a gloved hand against the inscription, echoing the hermit's design in the wedding photos, a hidden message waiting for her to decode. She rose and scanned the ritual altar. The 8 depressions must be refilled with their corresponding tokens, flower petals, cufflinks, shoes, masks, returned as offerings. But the 9th invitation card she carried could fill the final slot, completing the circle. She set her flashlight on a ledge, retrieving from her satchel each of the 8 tokens recovered thus far. One by one, she placed them into their matching niches: a rose petal, a silver cufflink, a shoe sole, a white mask, a torn glove, a music box key, a wine cork, and a confetti piece. Her pulse raced as she reached the empty slot. With a steady hand, she slipped the invitation card into place. Gold script facing upward. A soft rumble vibrated through the cavern. Dust fell from the ceiling. The sealed grate emitted a creak, as if the metal was acknowledging completion. Faint light seeped through the bars. Mara stepped back. The path beyond the grate beckoned, bathed in pale luminescence. The circle was whole. The binding ritual had been reversed. The hidden tunnel awaited, promising 8 answers. And one final truth. With determination, she placed her palm on the grate and prepared to push it open. The 8 lost had been neighbors of darkness. Now she would guide them into the light. A single silver ring lay on Mara Whitcomb's palm, cool and weightless. Its band etched with 8 names: Elena, Mark, Talia, Corey, Marissa, Jules, Theo, Adam, and one blank space circled by a delicate vine motif. She had recovered it from the hidden chamber, nestled in the central basin of the ritual altar. Its presence implied unity and invitation, but the blank slot carried a question. Who was the 9th? Mara studied the ring under her flashlight. The engraving was immaculate, each name carefully traced in looping script. The band's interior bore a date, July 14th, 2015. On the night of the wedding, this ring had bound the 8 together, a token passed among them in pledge. She recalled Lily Porter's description of petals drawn into the air by the lantern's light, of whispers promising safety in unity. The ring had sealed that promise. She slipped it onto her finger. It fit loosely, sliding over her knuckle, until it rested against her palm. Her pulse quickened. The ritual demanded completion, the ninth name. If she could discover it, the altar grate would open fully, exposing the path beyond. But whose name had been left unspoken? Her radio crackled. Reynolds called with the ground-penetrating radar results from the vineyard's east field. "Detective, we found a metallic object under the old fountain, possibly a cache." Mara thanked him and relayed her plan to finish in the cellar. She replaced the ring in her pocket and pushed the grate open, stepping through into a narrow corridor beyond. The air shifted, cooler and thicker, as she followed the passage toward another chamber. Here, the walls were smoother, the ceiling arched like a cathedral. At its center, a stone block bore a shallow pool of water, stained with mineral deposits. The old fountain, rediscovered. Ivy tendrils draped across its edges, as though nature sought to reclaim it. Mara rested a hand on the fountain's rim. She thought of the missing items recovered so painstakingly. Petals, cufflinks, shoes, mask, glove fragment, music box key, cork, confetti. Each had found its niche in the ritual circle. Now by the fountain they would offer final release. She retrieved the tokens from her satchel and placed them on the water's surface. One by one they floated outward, following the flow of the fountain's gentle trickle. As the last token, a worn shoe sole, floated free, the water churned. Subtly, a hatch opened beneath the pool, revealing a hidden compartment lined with velvet. Within lay a tarnished envelope sealed with wax bearing the same vine motif as the ring. Mara retrieved it and broke the seal, extracting a folded letter, yellowed with time. The handwriting was familiar, Mark's elegant script. "To the one who completes our circle," it began. "Our bond transcends blood and celebration. The ninth has always been among us, unseen yet guiding. Find the name that binds us and you will free our souls. Know that love protects and memory endures." Mara's breath caught. The ninth was not a guest at the wedding, but something deeper, love itself, an unseen guide. She refolded the letter and unfolded the ring again. The blank space, she realized, stood for the bond that united them. Friendship. The ring's final inscription was the word they had all forgotten. Friendship. Speaking the word aloud, Mara placed the letter atop the fountain's ledge and slipped the ring onto the block beside it. The ring glowed faintly, silver turning to pale gold beneath her touch. A low hum filled the chamber as the compartment hatch slid shut and the fountain's water stilled. A hidden door at the far end creaked open, revealing a final staircase. Descending into darkness, Mara paused, heart racing, then stepped forward. At the bottom, she found a shallow pool reflecting 8 silhouettes standing on the stair rim. Ghostly, silent. They wore wedding attire, faces serene. Their hands reached. Toward her in gratitude, Mara stepped into the water. The silhouettes drifted apart, dissolving as they moved forward toward a brilliant light. One by one, they crossed the threshold and vanished, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and aged oak. The chamber fell silent. She ascended alone, the ring now empty of names, its purpose fulfilled. The door closed behind her with a gentle sigh. In the cellar above, the world waited, a place for answers, for closure. 8 lost souls had found release through friendship's cure, and the 9th was the bond they shared, never named but always present, guiding them home. The leather journal lay on Mara Whitcomb's desk, its cover warped by time and damp salt residue. It had been recovered from a sealed chest found in an abandoned boathouse 7 miles downstream, the final destination of the river that carried fragments of the wedding party's story. She peeled back the rusted clasp and opened to the first page, where an elegant script scrawled in fading ink read, "To remember is to release." The words were smudged with crystalline salt, as if someone had wept onto the paper. Mara turned the page. The entries were dated from 2 months before the wedding through the night of July 14th, 2015. Each page chronicled rituals and observations, notes on lunar phases, and sketches of ivy patterns, diagrams that matched the photo booth symbols. The author had recorded every element of the ceremony designed to bind 8 souls: petals, lanterns, wine, whispers, and the ring of friendship. The final entry, however, ended abruptly and soaked through the next pages. She traced a knuckle across the tear-stained passage. They laughed, believing themselves safe in our circle, but the tide of grief waits always for its moment. Tonight, the bond will hold them even as they cross into memory. I pray their release finds me unbroken. The salt stains darkened the words, as if tears had fallen in grief or repentance. Mara flicked to the next visible dated entry, but the ink had dissolved, leaving only ghostly outlines. Her radio crackled. Reynolds called from the evidence lab. "Detective, we've identified the handwriting. It belongs to Gregory Hensley, science teacher and field trip leader." Mara's breath hitched. The man once suspected in darker rumors of the case had confessed his knowledge in private, leaving behind this journal as penance. She sank into her chair. Gregory's statements from 2015 portrayed him as confident and reassuring, a man who led children through forests with maps and compasses. Yet here, his words revealed an obsession. The ritual beneath the vineyard was part of an older tradition, one he had inherited, one that demanded sacrifice and remembrance. He believed the bond he forged would protect the wedding party and perhaps absolve him of earlier failures. Mara turned pages. Further entries, brittle with salt and water damage, revealed more. A sketch of the service gate annotated with lock schematics. Notes on hidden tunnels he had drawn from the hermit's cabin beneath Elder's Hill. Even a detailed map of the wine cellar breach. All by Hensley, meticulous in planning, but torn by guilt. The final legible line chilled her. "I will guide them here into sacred earth and bind their souls until I find redemption. Forgive me, my friends." The journal ended there. No date, no signature. The rest of the pages were blank or consumed by water stains. Mara rose and paced. The journal clutched to her chest. Gregory had positioned himself as shepherd and hermit, orchestrating every detail. He had extended the ritual beyond a simple binding circle. He had carried it into the river, the boathouse, and finally his own confession. The salt tears that stained the pages spoke of remorse, long delayed. She placed the journal into an evidence bag, preserving every smear of ink and salt crystal. Then she sat at her computer and opened the digital files from the boathouse excavation. Photos revealed the chest in murky water, barnacles encrusted along its edges. Inside, alongside the journal, had rested a tarnished music box cylinder and a lock of hair tied with a bridal ribbon. DNA tests confirmed the hair belonged to Elena. Tears came unbidden to Mara's eyes. Gregory had kept Elena's hair as a memento, perhaps hoping to save her spirit even as he led her into darkness. His journal was his plea for forgiveness, a map to the ritual he could not undo until now. Her radio crackled again. Calder's voice was soft. "Detective, we found something at the boathouse, a photograph with Gregory in it, standing beside the hermit's cabin. It's dated May 1972. Mara's heart pounded. Hensley's connection to the hermit extended decades before the wedding. He had inherited not only the cabin's legacy, but the ritual itself. She closed her eyes, envisioning the vineyard's hidden chamber, the flooded fountain, the rising silhouettes. The journal's final entry marked Gregory's acceptance of his role, the orchestrator and the guardian, the culprit and the penitent. Now, 9 years later, his confession in salt-stained pages would bring closure. Mara gathered the journal, And evidence, her resolve strengthened. Gregory Hensley's sins had been recorded, his remorse sealed in ink and tears. It was time to confront him, to hear his voice behind those elegant lines. Only then could the final pages of this story be written, and the victims finally exonerated in truth. The precinct was quieter than usual when Mara Whitcomb returned. From the boathouse site, the salt-stained journal tucked under her arm. She swiped through the digital log of boathouse photos until one image froze her breath. A lone figure, standing at the water's edge, back turned, head bowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The date stamp read, May 1972. She magnified the image. The jacket was too tailored for a drifter, cuffs neatly sewn, belt polished. The hermit's cabin on Elder's Hill had once housed a solitary man. This silhouette suggested a guest, someone passing through long ago. Her phone buzzed. Reynolds. Detective, the photograph you flagged, we ran facial recognition against archives. No match in local records, but the eyes looked familiar. He sent her a close-up. The hat's shadow gave way to strong cheekbones and a narrow jaw. A mole rested just above the left temple. Mara's pulse quickened. The features matched Gregory Hensley. She tapped a reply. Meet me at the station. Now. Within minutes, Gregory Hensley entered the bullpen, shoulders stooped, eyes wary. Time had etched lines into his face, but the mole was unmistakable. He carried himself like a man who lived with secrets heavier than his frame. Mara greeted him in the interrogation room. Thank you for coming, she said, placing the journal on the table. I have questions about this entry. She opened to the page. I will guide them here into sacred earth and bind their souls until I find redemption. His gaze flicked to the words, then away. I wrote that, he said softly. I was only trying to protect them. His voice trembled. I thought the ritual would hold them safe, keep the darkness at bay. I never meant to hurt anyone. Mara folded her hands. You guided 8 people, your students, your friends, into an elaborate binding ritual beneath a vineyard. You controlled their disappearance and penned your confession in salt tears. But tonight you are here as an uninvited guest in their story. Why should I believe your remorse is genuine? He closed his eyes. Because I carry their faces every moment, because I've spent 9 years living with what I did. I found the journal at the cabin after the wedding, buried under rubble. I read the hermit's notes, discovered the ritual was older, passed down, a pact between those who seek to transcend time. I tried to stop it. I recorded every detail in that journal, hoping someone someday would read it and break the cycle. Mara studied him. Then why keep Elena's hair? He glanced at the leather-bound book. It was the last piece of her I had. I couldn't bear to let go. I kept it tucked away, hoping one day to give it back to her father. His eyes glittered. I knew the ritual could be undone if someone reversed each step. But I was afraid of what would happen if the circle broke and the binding collapsed. She leaned forward. You orchestrated their binding, but lacked courage to release them. That makes you both architect and jailer. He nodded. I'm the uninvited guest in your investigation. I wrote the map to their release, but couldn't. Follow it myself. Mara's mind raced. His confession matched the journal's salt-streaked entries, the boathouse chest, the fountain ritual, the ring's final phrase, friendship, all his doing. What happened at the boathouse? She asked. Why bury the journal downstream? He exhaled. Guilt. I couldn't face the truth in the cabins beneath the hill. I took the journal, locked it away in the boathouse, thinking I could bury my sins. But the salt tears in those pages, they called me back. He held up trembling hands. I left the journal where it would surface only when the river was ready to return its secrets. Mara reached for it. You invited death with that river. You invited memory. Now you stand before me, the ritual's last witness. She closed the journal. Your words will help, but your actions speak of betrayal. I need you to lead us to the final chamber, the uncharted tunnel beneath the hill. You cannot undo the past, but you can save the future." Hensley's jaw clenched. He rose slowly. "I will guide you. I'll take you to where it all began." Outside, rain began to patter against the station windows, as if the sky itself mourned. Mara pocketed her badge. The uninvited guest would be her reluctant guide into darkness, this time to rescue 8 souls ensnared by a bond he alone had forged, and perhaps in that descent he might find redemption at last. Night draped the forest in velvet shadows as Detective Mara Whitcomb climbed the narrow trail with Gregory Hensley beside her, lantern in hand. The only sound was the soft crunch of pine needles beneath their boots and the distant susurrus of the wind through ancient pines. Every breath of air felt alive, as if the forest itself inhaled and exhaled around them, watching their progress. Hensley paused where gnarled roots split the path. "Here," he whispered, voice tremulous. He knelt and brushed away leaves, revealing a rusted iron ring sunk flush with the earth. It matched the ones on the ritual grate and service gate. "This secured the rope ladder," he said. "We used it to descend." Mara knelt and lifted the ring, wincing at the cold metal. She uncoiled the rope ladder from her pack and hooked it through, then tested its weight. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded, eyes downcast. Together they eased over the ledge, climbing into darkness. Below lay the Hermit's Hollow, a circular clearing ringed by moss-draped stones. In the center, breath misted in the lanterns. Glow above an entrance carved into bedrock. The air carried an uncanny pulse, a rhythmic thrum like a distant heartbeat. The forest above seemed to lean inward, its branches creaking as if curious. Mara placed a foot on the rim of the tunnel and peered into the void. Water dripped from unseen ceilings. Each droplet echoed in the dim chamber like a tolling bell. She swung the lantern inside, revealing walls carved with vine motifs and faces, abstract, watchful, half-formed. The carvings pulsed as her light passed over, shadows shifting as if breathing. Stepping in, she passed Gregory, who scanned the carvings with reverence. "They record the pacts, the promises," he murmured. "Each face is a soul bound here." Mara's skin prickled. 8 faces, one for each person. She counted them, elongated eyes, pressed lips, tranquil expressions. The 9th face was incomplete, the features blurred as if never finished. They threaded deeper, following the pulse of the forest's breath echoing through the tunnel. Water pooled underfoot, sending ripples of reflected lantern light dancing across the walls. The murmuring hush grew louder. Impossible to tell if it was wind, underground streams, or the forest's living presence. At last, they arrived at the cavern where the ritual altar had been. The grate lay open, dust undisturbed. Moss had crept over the floor, softening its stone patterns. The central basin, now empty and dry, bore the outlines of 8 depressions. The 9th remained blank. Hensley exhaled. "The forest's breath guided me back here," he said. "It calls to the one who completes the circle." Mara knelt by the basin and set the silver ring in the blank slot. It clicked into place. The carvings on the walls awakened, shadows recoiling, then realigning into 8 living visages. The incomplete 9th face shimmered into form. Lily Porter, the silent witness, her childlike features drifted from the stone, eyes gentle yet resolute. A rush of wind tore through the cavern, stirring moss and whispers in an ancient tongue. Fern fronds quivered, and the earth beneath her knees hummed. The vines carved into the walls glowed faintly green. Breathing in unison, the forest spoke. Through the stone, a series of soft sighs that pressed against Mara's eardrums. One by one, outlines of the 8 bound souls materialized in the lantern light. Elena's serene smile, Mark's earnest gaze, Talia's gentle warmth, Corey's steady presence, Marissa's playful glint, Jules's steady courage, Theo's steadfast calm, Adam's quiet strength. They hovered above the depressions, translucent and drifting, eyes fixed on the newly completed circle. Mara held her breath. The air thickened with warmth as the figures floated toward the exit tunnel. Each soul passed the lantern to the next, a chain of light that grew brighter with every hand. When the final figure crossed beneath the ledge, the pulse of the forest stilled. Silence reigned, profound and tender. Lily's visage lingered for a heartbeat, brushing her lips against the rock as if in farewell. Then she too drifted upward, footprints of wind closing behind her. The grate shuddered and sealed itself, vines curling around the iron bars. The carvings, once animated, faded back to still stone. Mara exhaled, feeling the forest relax around her, the living world resuming its quiet watch. Gregory placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "They are free," he whispered. "The forest has claimed them, guided them home." They climbed back into the clearing, leaving only footprints that vanished as twilight turned to moonlight. Above, the pines swayed once more, breathing gently in the hush of remembrance. The hidden ritual, woven into earth and vine, had ended in a final exhalation. 8 souls returned to light, and the forest, silent and ancient, breathed again, in peace. The morning light filtered through the stained-glass windows of the chapel atop Stonevale vineyards, dust motes drifting through the shafts of gold and crimson. Detective Mara Whitcomb stood at the altar where Eleanor and Mark had exchanged vows 9 years earlier. The candles had long since burned away, but their brass holders remained, tarnished and silent. She surveyed the carved stone floor, tracing the faint circular pattern where the wedding ring had bound friends in ritual. Her question echoed in the emptiness. Who truly stood here that night? She stepped forward, recalling the hermit's face, etched in the cavern, Gregory Hensley's confession, Lily Porter's vision of petals drawn by lantern light. 8 souls vanished, 8 names drowned in ritual, but someone else had been present at the altar. Someone unseen in the official guest list, someone whose presence had been recorded only in hidden messages and reflections. Mara drew her notebook and read her own notes. The altar figure in the first wedding photo, the shadowy silhouette blurred. Behind the bride and groom, she knelt to inspect the floor near the left column. The stone was worn there, as if someone had kneaded over it in prayer. A single scuff mark led from the chapel door to where the bride and groom had stood. The path curved subtly, too curved for any of the 8. She rose as footsteps echoed behind her. Gregory appeared in the doorway, eyes somber. "I never told you," he said quietly, "about the 9th. He closed the distance and placed a hand on the altar's edge. "I stood here that night." Mara turned. But you led them into darkness. Why at the altar?" Hensley's gaze drifted across the empty pews. "I was the uninvited, who guessed, the keeper of the ritual. I watched from the shadows, hidden by a decorative column. I ensured each step, the petals, the lantern, the circle, so they would follow the path I carved for them. I needed to witness the vow they took, the promise of friendship bound by that ring." He paused. "I knelt here, praying for their safety, believing the ritual would protect them." Mara's chest tightened. "And when the glitch hit the security footage," he nodded, "I triggered it from the chapel's control room. 2 seconds of static to hide my presence, to mask the moment the lantern's signal lured them toward the vines." He swallowed. "I erased myself from their memory." Silence fell between them as sunlight shifted across the altar. Mara closed her eyes, imagining the 8 friends gathered in celebration, vows fresh, hopes high, unaware of the shadow watching them vow friendship in sacred light. She touched the stone where his hand had rested. You stood at the altar, yes, but you did not stand with them. You stood apart, orchestrating their disappearance. Hensley exhaled. I paid for my sins, detective. I guided their release. What I did was unforgivable, but I freed their souls. Mara met his gaze. You freed them underground. Now I must answer one more question. Who stood with them in spirit? She reached into her coat pocket and produced a single white rose petal. This was found pressed into the altar's stone beneath the wine stain. She held it toward him. Elena's sister, Talia, told me after the ceremony she slipped away to mourn privately, placing her rose on the altar. She wept there, lamenting a premonition she could not share. She, too, stood at the altar that night, silent, alone, tethered by love to her sister. Hensley's eyes glistened. I remember her now. She stood there, unseen by me, but present in heart. His shoulders sagged. Talia's sorrow was the missing bond, the true ninth. Not I, but she. Love for her. Sister watched over them. Mara nodded. The chapel seemed to exhale, the dust motes dancing upward as if released. 8 vows had been spoken at the altar, but 9 hearts had gathered, 8 bound by friendship and 1 by love. The final witness had been Talia, whose silent presence had anchored the promise and guided the way. Mara stepped back from the altar. The past had unfolded, secrets revealed, rituals undone. She and Gregory left the chapel side by side, leaving behind the altar that had held vows, shadows, and the unspoken devotion of a silent sister. The day dawned pale gold over Stonevale vineyards, the mist clinging to vine rows like a whispered secret. Detective Mara Whitcomb stood at the edge of the ceremony lawn, recalling every step taken since the disappearance, the vanished 8, the hidden tunnels, the ritual altar, the cellar breach, the forest's breath. Now, at the place where laughter once rang beneath string lights, she sensed the final act unfolding. The ceremony, she realized, had never truly ended. A hush settled as she walked across dew-damp grass toward the trellised arbor. Beneath it, 8 chairs remained in their ancient pattern, arranged in a perfect circle. No items lay upon them now. Tokens returned to earth, to water, to ritual. In the center, a silver stand held a single gilt-edged invitation. Time had yellowed its edges, yet the gold script read, "You are bound by love, friendship, and memory, and bound you shall remain." Mara lifted the invitation and read the last line, "Join us always." A breeze stirred at her back, carrying the faintest echoes of a wedding song. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her, the soft swell of strings, the rise of voices, distant yet clear. 12 years ago it had ended in disappearance. Today it would end in reunion. She walked to the arbor's center, slipping the invitation into the carved heart at its base. The air quivered. Vines unseen unfurled, petals drifting from overhead greenery, like souls returning. The melody swelled, and with it shapes materialized before her. 8 figures in wedding attire, their features peaceful. Elena's white dress caught dawn's glow. Mark's suit reflected the morning light. Talia stood beside them, offering a rose with a gentle smile. The other 5, Corey, Marissa, Jules, Theo, Adam, formed the circle, hands joined, faces serene. Mara's breath hitched. For 9 years she had pursued their ghosts, catalogued their relics, pieced together a ritual that bound them in subterranean slumber. Yet here they were, alive again in spirit, summoned by the completion of the ceremony. The vineyard seemed to exhale joy, vines swaying in silent applause. The figures turned as one and bowed to Mara, gratitude shining in their eyes. Tears stung her cheeks. She stepped forward, her hand brushing Elena's sleeve, a whisper of fabric, a promise fulfilled. The bride's lips curved in a smile. Mark reached out, clasping Mara's hand briefly before releasing it to embrace Talia. Sister to sister, they shared a quiet reunion, bridging life and memory. The music rose and fell, a lullaby for souls unbound. From the circle's center, a soft light radiated, rippling outward through the vineyard. The chairs, once empty, now glowed with echoes of presence. The arbor bloomed with white roses, each petal a testament to vows unbroken. Mara closed her eyes, remembering the journalist's question. What really happened to the wedding party? She now knew that the party had never truly left. Instead, they had been woven into a tapestry of ritual, love, and time. The ceremonies of binding and unbinding had mirrored each other, one to hold them, the other to release them. When the final note faded, the garden held only quiet mourning. The 8 figures and Talia vanished like mist at sunrise, leaving behind dew-kissed vines and a single white rose at Mara's feet. She picked it up, tucking its stem into her coat. The invitation lay open on the stand, its words now faded as if read for the last time. Mara turned to leave, each step firm with closure. The ceremony was never meant to end. It had simply awaited its true completion. In the vineyard's heart, memories and promises had found harmony, and in the gentle hush that followed, love, friendship, and memory remained forever intertwined.